With Yuzuha now officially released, ZenlessZoneZero is changing in a big way. Astra's reign as the definitive best support is being challenged, Miyabi mains may have just found their new best partner, and Hoyoverse has declared that requiring more than one button to play a character is now illegal. With that in mind, today we're diving into everything you need to know about Yuzuha, including things like how she works, how to play her, and why she might just be your next must-pull support. As a reminder, however, today's video will feature footage from the creator beta server, and as a result, things are subject to change. But if you enjoyed or learned something from what you're about to see, like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado though, let's break down everything you need to know to make Yuzuha OP. Yuzuha is a straightforward yet highly effective anomaly support with a kit centered around increasing anomaly application and disorder procs. While her main focus is supporting anomaly-based teams though, she also brings solid value to a variety of DPS agents thanks to her team-wide buffs. Her gameplay revolves around frequently using her EX special and ultimate to mark enemies with Sweet Scare, and this will also refill sugar points, which of course power her aftershock attacks while off-field. Sweet Scare is particularly important though, as it allows her to copy an ally's attribute anomaly, making her extremely flexible and well-performing with almost any setup. Combined with her buffs to both disorder damage and anomaly buildup, Yuzuha is not only a powerful anomaly-based support, she also has the potential to offer higher or comparable buffs to the likes of Astra, who most would consider the best support in the game. Before we get into the specifics of Yuzuha's abilities, I do want to clarify that while she might seem like a simple support on the surface, there's actually a lot more to her kit in terms of how she functions, especially when it comes to her passive effects and how her kit accelerates anomaly buildup. That said, let's walk through each section to fully understand how Yuzuha works, starting with her unique mechanic and resource. Yuzuha's special resource is called Sugar Points, which powers her passive aftershock attacks. She starts with 3 sugar points upon entering the field and can hold up to 6 at once, and when she has sugar points available, any ally that lands an attack will then trigger basic attack Hard Candy Shot, and this is a passive follow-up from Yuzuha that targets surrounding enemies. However, each time Hard Candy Shot lands a heavy hit, it consumes 1 sugar point. In addition to sugar points, Yuzuha's other core mechanic is Sweet Scare. This is a debuff applied by hitting enemies with their EX or ultimate, and Sweet Scare lasts for 40 seconds and allows Yuzuha to use Flavor Match. Now we have to break down this ability as it's incredibly important to Yuzuha's gameplay goals as well. When an ally hits a Sweet Scare affected enemy with the skill that matches their attribute anomaly, Yuzuha's follow-up attack will take on that same attribute. This makes her exceptionally flexible as she can match the standard attributes of physical, ice, fire, or electric depending on your team composition. Reapplying Sweet Scare will also remove the old Flavor Match, letting you refresh or switch attributes at will. However, one small but very important detail is that Sweet Scare can sometimes apply anomalies too quickly, especially in lineups that already have a lot of anomaly buildup. This may cause you to wait on your anomaly procs / disorder cooldowns, creating moments where your main anomaly agent is forced to stall until the cooldown resets. Yuzuha's core passive, Whimsical Wonder, is what enables much of her support value. When she applies Sweet Scare to an enemy, the entire squad gains an attack bonus equal to 40% of Yuzuha's initial attack, capped at 1200, along with a flat 15% damage increase to all abilities. These buffs last for 40 seconds and refresh if the effect is reapplied, but on top of this, this is also the passive that grants her 3 sugar points when she enters the field. It is also worth noting here that if her initial attack stat reaches 3000 or more, the squad automatically receives the full attack bonus. So while it's possible to calculate the exact amount of attack that she would gain at various levels, reaching 3000 is a solid way of removing the need for that and makes things much simpler. Yuzuha's additional ability, The More the Merrier, activates when she's paired with either an anomaly agent or an ally from her faction. When active, each time she applies Sweet Scare and her anomaly mastery exceeds 100, every point above 100 increases the team's anomaly buildup rate by 0.2% up to a maximum of 20%. Additionally, it boosts attribute anomaly and disorder damage by 0.2% per point above 100, again up to 20%. These bonuses also last for 40 seconds and refresh when Sweet Scare is reapplied. Now, while this sounds amazing, and it is, getting to 200 anomaly mastery to max out the effect can be difficult without her signature W engine or a highly focused build. So don't stress too much if you can't fully cap it, as even a partial version of this effect provides strong value to anomaly-based teams. Yuzuha's basic attack is a standard 5-hit combo that deals physical damage, and holding the basic button puts her in a parry stance for 1.5 seconds. If she's hit during this time, she executes a counterattack that deals bonus damage in daze, and while this parry also restores 1 sugar point on successful hit, these basic attacks aren't a central part of her gameplay and honestly aren't used that often in her ideal rotations. That said, she does have a basic that actually sees more frequent use, regardless if you're a veteran or casual player. Hard Candy Shot is the real bread and butter of Yuzuha's kit. This passive aftershock attack activates off field as long as she has sugar points and Sweet Scare is active. This will also apply anomalies based on the Flavor Match attribute and is unique in 2 specific specific ways. Number one, it allows off-field anomaly application, which is pretty rare, but this also doesn't reduce the final anomaly or disorder damage, meaning that Yuzuha helps build up without diluting how much damage the anomaly would actually deal. For number two, the attribute that she chooses to replicate is entirely up to the player. Therefore, if at one point it makes more sense to replicate Yanagi's electric attribute, that's fine. However, later on, there is a chance that copying and swapping to Vivian's ether, or even someone like Bernice's fire attribute, could instead be more helpful. This makes her incredibly efficient at helping teams fill anomaly faster and also more reliably. Yuzuha's EX special is a bomb toss that deals physical damage in a small area, and when hitting an enemy, it inflicts Sweet Scare. This ability also restores 2 sugar points and triggers a quick assist on hit, helping her both refill sugar points and swap off to another agent seamlessly. If the EX special is used immediately after a dodge counter or quick assist as well, this does mean she'll perform a slightly altered version, but the functionality in essence remains the same: hit enemies, apply Sweet Scare, regain sugar points. Yuzuha's assist abilities are pretty standard overall, though her defensive assist does stand out slightly by restoring 1 sugar point on activation. Outside of that, her assists apply days and contribute a bit to anomaly buildup, but the real value here again lies in using them to help build her sugar resource more efficiently and technically apply a bit more anomaly. As a result, you should use them when needed, but they aren't necessarily something you have to rely on as a primary part of your rotation. Now, Yuzuha's chain attack hits enemies in a small AoE, and while the damage itself is nothing special, it provides decent value with what it does after. It restores 1 sugar point and immediately triggers a quick assist, allowing you to keep her buff up time and aftershock attacks continuing. Unlike chain attacks from other support agents though, Yuzuha's is worth using whenever available, especially if you're trying to top off sugar points, maintain Swing Jazz's passive, or just gain decibels faster. Now, Yuzuha's ultimate deals a decent burst of physical damage to enemies in a wide area, and like her EX special, applies Sweet Scare if it lands on an enemy. More importantly though, it also restores 2 sugar points and triggers a quick assist on cast, giving it strong value. And as with all support ultimates in ZenlessZoneZero, casting this will also grant 25 energy to all squad members, helping your DPS agents to get their abilities up faster. Overall, it's a well-rounded ability with good utility and the ability to maintain uptime on Yuzuha's important buffs/debuffs. Now, for her skill priority, she aims to upgrade her core passive first, her basic second, her chain and ultimate third, EX special fourth, and assist/dodge at 5th and 6th. In general though, while leveling her skills can improve things like buff durations or anomaly buildup on her basic, Yuzuha's abilities don't scale in the same way that Astra's do. For example, upgrading Astra's EX special directly improves the value of her team buffs, and in Yuzuha's case, skill upgrades offer incremental improvements, but her actual value still remains tied to her mechanics as a whole rather than the raw scaling of them. As a result, her skills do matter, but not nearly as much as you'd think. Now that we've broken down Yuzuha's kit, let's talk about her gameplay and some of her combos and how they work in practice. Thankfully, this is surprisingly simple. However, there are some optimizations and considerations for how to play her. Let's start first with the skips and skill optimizations, as this can be even more relevant at times than her combos. To begin, we need to revisit her EX special. Although I initially said that the function of Yuzuha's 2 EX specials is similar, the truth is that the second EX special has a shorter animation and is also weaker. At this point, you might be wondering why using a weaker ability would have any value whatsoever, but that's where we need to include clarification about how Anomaly works. Here's how Anomaly damage functions. When an enemy's Anomaly meter is filled, the Anomaly proficiency stats of all characters who contribute to filling that meter are combined and calculated together. This collective total then determines the strength or damage of the attribute Anomaly effect that got triggered, so even if your support isn't necessarily built with Anomaly proficiency in mind, they can still influence your main DPS's Anomaly-based damage so long as they contributed to the same Anomaly meter. This also means that anytime Yuzuha hits or applies Anomaly, she still impacts the final damage from the Anomaly applied. However, for anomalies that she applies via Flavor Match, where she copies another ally's attribute, Yuzuha does not contribute to the damage calculation at all, and in those cases, her application uniquely helps with buildup, and she doesn't dilute or affect the final damage dealt, regardless of how low her Anomaly proficiency is. With this, using Yuzuha's EX special when possible after a quick assist or perfect dodge is incredibly useful, but of course you need to time this. Now, this shortcut specifically is important because using Yuzuha's faster, shorter animation EX special provides 2 key benefits. First, the shorter animation reduces downtime, making attacks smoother and more time efficient, and second, when paired with physical anomaly agents where her Anomaly proficiency is relevant, her EX special contributes much less to the Anomaly calculation, which means that she reduces the final Anomaly damage much less. This allows the main Anomaly agent's damage to remain impactful, while Yuzuha still maintains using her buffs and using an EX special that isn't as harmful to the team's overall DPS. Now, this was a bit of a mouthful, but as a final note, Yuzuha's second secondary assist follow-up does also slightly apply more anomaly buildup than her standard. However, since it requires waiting slightly longer to perform and she doesn't use too many defensive assists in general, the impact of this optimization is okay, but not insane. So while this is a nice detail for min-maxers, it's not something that most players need to worry about. Regarding the actual combos themselves though, surprise, they really aren't that difficult to understand. Using her EX special to tag enemies with Sweet Scare early is always ideal, and as you get more and more decibels, using her ultimate to either reapply said debuff or gain more sugar points is fine too. Being 100% serious though, Yuzuha's combo can look exactly like the following. First, use Yuzuha's EX special to apply Sweet Scare and Tanuki's Wish to the team, then use the quick assist triggered by this ability to swap to the team's main DPS. Next, defensive assist from the main DPS to Yuzuha whenever you're close to stunning the enemy or if you need to reapply buffs, then use her EX special / ultimate once on Yuzuha so that you can reapply her buffs / debuffs. Finally, use her quick assist back to the main DPS to end things off, and of course, within this combo, using a chain attack during a stun window can be particularly helpful for Yuzuha, but admittedly, there are times where this might not be worth it, especially if you don't even have 4-piece swing jazz on. Now again, though there are optimizations and tricks to make her perform better, she's very high performing even at a casual base level, so keep this in mind when learning how to play her. When it comes to Yuzuha's W engine options, her signature is hands down the best performing choice, no surprise there. It grants a significant boost to her anomaly mastery for 40 seconds, and more importantly, provides a powerful team-wide effect. If her aftershock hits an enemy, the entire squad then gains 60 anomaly proficiency for 40 seconds. The only condition here though is that you have to hit an enemy with physical damage using either her EX special or ultimate, but this is incredibly easy to maintain with Yuzuha's standard combos. The main value of this engine though isn't even just in its team buff, it's the raw anomaly mastery that you gain in stats. Now while Yuzuha's additional ability doesn't require you to hit 200 anomaly mastery to function, gaining the extra damage from getting closer to or at 200 itself is pretty valuable. That said, doing so is deceptively hard. The only reliable sources for anomaly mastery are the 2-piece effect from Phaethon's Melody, a 6-slot anomaly mastery disc, and her signature W engine plus Mark II. Even with all 3 components, however, Yuzuha barely scrapes past the 200 mark, landing at around 201 anomaly mastery in total. Because of this, fully activating her additional ability often depends on whether you have the specific W engine, and with this said, just like with Astra or Jafufu, not capping the bonus is perfectly acceptable, so don't feel forced to chase perfection if it costs you your entire savings of polychromes or ruins your other builds. In terms of performance, her signature W engine outperforms other options by a noticeable margin, and it's around 5% stronger than Kaboom the Cannon and roughly 7% stronger than Weeping Cradle. As a disclaimer before we dive deeper though, these amounts do fluctuate depending on the team and what enemy you're fighting, so keep this in mind as we proceed further. Let's break down each engine, starting with Kaboom the Cannon. Kaboom trades anomaly specific buffs for a straightforward 10% combat buff, and this makes it a decent choice if you're leaning towards buffing general DPS rather than anomaly fixated supports. Weeping Cradle is technically a pay-to-win engine as it's an S-rank standard, but as this is accessible through the in-game pity store and also from the anniversary selector, it's somewhat free-to-play friendly-ish, if you can call it that. That said, it does also offer a pretty consistent debuff and okay value overall, but it does fall short of the stats and team-wide value provided by her signature. Mark II is another option for free-to-plays, but as per testing and calculations, the added anomaly mastery here is just worse here than Kaboom, Weeping, or even her signature. If you have nothing else though, this will still work. Recommendation-wise, Yuzuha's signature is by far her best in slot and the top pick for full anomaly teams, and Kaboom the Cannon is a reasonable alternative in case damage-focused or hybrid lineups is your goal. Weeping Cradle as a choice is also fine obviously if you need a more general use accessible support option, but it doesn't reach quite the same level as her signature. With this, if you're on the fence about whether you should pull for her signature, I likely wouldn't, but admittedly the sheer visual effect that you gain from having her signature does persuade me decently. Don't let me influence whether you choose to pick it up though. Now let's talk about Yuzuha's drive disc sets, main stats, and recommended stat goals. Set-wise, Yuzuha's best all-around option is 4-piece swing jazz, and this is because it provides a consistent 15% team-wide damage boost, which benefits nearly any team that she's used in. It's easy to maintain, requires no specific conditions, and works especially well in general anomaly or crit-based teams. Another option is 4-piece Astra Voice, which offers strong utility, especially for teams that benefit from using quick assists or attack percent. That said, maintaining this damage percent passive does require her to gain and consistently spend 60 energy, which can be difficult depending on how often she's being used. In most cases, however, you won't actually be able to keep up all stacks consistently, so this is actually more niche than you'd think. If you're running a physical DPS, 4-piece Freedom Blues is one of the best choices here, and this is because it significantly increases the team's anomaly buildup rate, but only works if your ideal or main DPS is someone like Jane, Piper, or Alice. Outside of these characters, this set provides little value, so only consider it in physical-based teams. The last option here is 4-piece Protopunk, which is the easiest to activate since any assist, not just Yuzuha's, can trigger its passive. Now, while the shield effect from Protopunk may feel wasted in this case, it's still a decent option for Yuzuha and can be used especially if the other sets are taken. On the topic of 2-piece sets, Phaethon's Melody is a must-have for Yuzuha as it's one of the only reliable sources of Anomaly Mastery in her build and is essential for reaching the 200 Anomaly Mastery threshold that she needs to max out her additional ability. Pretty much nothing else can compare to this as it converts directly to damage and to Anomaly application. Yuzuha's main stats for her 4th, 5th, and 6th slots are pretty straightforward though. Slot 4 will want attack percent or Anomaly proficiency, slot 5 will want attack percent or physical damage, slot 6 will want Anomaly Mastery or attack percent, but despite this, in almost all cases, you'll ideally want Anomaly Mastery in 6th slot as it's the most important slot for helping her reach the 200 Anomaly breakpoint. Without this slot rolled properly, she'll usually cap out at around 171 Anomaly Mastery, and this of course falls short of the additional ability's full effect. For other important breakpoints to hit for her stats, of course you'll be aiming for 3000 attack to fully activate the team-wide attack buff from her core passive, and again 200 Anomaly Mastery if you're trying to fully activate her additional ability, though this may not be possible. Now, despite these important breakpoints, these can be especially tough to reach without her signature or the Mark II W engine, so if you don't have these, it's okay to settle for slightly lower value. The main goal is to get as close as possible to these thresholds specifically, and assuming that you do, her buffs and support role will still perform well. Now let's talk about Yuzuha's Mindscapes. To start things off, Yuzuha's first Mindscape already delivers a lot of value, especially for anomaly focused teams. The first part of said Mindscape grants her 30 energy upon entering the field, and this helps her use multiple EX specials and use ultimates much more quickly. In addition to this, enemies afflicted by Sweet Scare will now have their all attribute resistance reduced by 10%, and this is a powerful team-wide debuff that boosts your team's total damage. More importantly though, the buffs from Yuzuha's additional ability will also be enhanced significantly when unlocking this Mindscape. To be specific about its effect, her attribute anomaly and disorder damage buffs are increased to 130% of their original values, meaning that the total team gain actually reaches up to 26% once everything is said and done. Overall, the 26% boost to her damage is by far one of the most impactful increases among all her Mindscapes, and is definitely worth pulling for, assuming that you have the means for it. Moving on to her second Mindscape, this is where Yuzuha's kit really starts to see massive buffs. Whenever her EX special or ultimate hits an enemy, the entire team gains a 15% damage bonus and 15% anomaly buildup rate increase for 40 seconds. To add to this, her second Mindscape introduces an added chain attack mechanic. If Yuzuha lands a heavy attack on a non-stun target, this will then automatically trigger a chain attack. Now, while this might sound confusing, this effectively allows your main DPS to have a second completely free chain attack opportunity, and on top of all of this, whenever another character enters via this forced chain attack, Yuzuha gains 1 sugar point, directly feeding into her anomaly cycling. To tie everything together, however, her hard candy shot cooldown is also reduced by 25%, letting her trigger more frequent aftershocks and increase anomaly buildup overall. Seriously guys, this Mindscape is crazy. To put it in simple numbers, Yuzuha's second Mindscape gives her an additional 24% damage on top of her Mindscape, and in case you're curious about whether her M1, M2, or her signature was better value, the answer is clear. You'd definitely want to choose her Mindscapes over her signature, unless some absolutely horrifying RNG happens to you when it comes to your signature. No promises there though. As for her fourth Mindscape, the upgrade here isn't quite as dramatic as her second Mindscape, but this still offers great value, especially for players who use Yuzuha in assist heavy or quick swap combos. With this, her assist follow-up skills now have 30% more damage, gain 20% increased anomaly buildup rate, and most importantly, actually now activates an additional quick assist when they hit an enemy. That final point specifically also allows Yuzuha to effectively loop into more skills for other characters, and this will maintain momentum during chain attacks or general combat. Now overall, this Mindscape isn't that crazy though, and although it does account for a bit of utility, this is only somewhere between a 1 to 3% damage increase to Yuzuha, which is honestly pretty ignorable. Finally, Yuzuha's sixth Mindscape is where she gets one of the most powerful support upgrades in the entire game. When she performs her assist follow-up, Stuffed Hard Candy Shot, she can now hold the attack for up to 0.8 seconds to charge it. For every 0.4 seconds of charging, however, she consumes 1 sugar point to fight an additional powerful shell, each dealing 300% of her attack as physical damage. At max charge, she can also fire this up to 3 times in rapid succession, and this creates massive burst on demand. Now, despite all this, the real value lies in what those shots do for the team. If any of these powerful shells connect with an enemy, the entire squad gains a 105% disorder damage multiplier buff for 40 seconds, and this stacks up to 3 times. To make things even better, if the enemy is under Sweet Scare, these charge shots will also trigger Yuzuha's basic attack Sugar Burst Sparkles, dealing even more damage and enabling faster anomaly buildup. Even on top of all this, however, if Yuzuha is attacked while charging this move, she will automatically dodge and unleash the max charged version instantly. Now, aside from the damage that this provides, this also makes her far more forgiving to play against aggressive enemies, and altogether, this final Mindscape pushes Yuzuha to the absolute peak of anomaly support potential, giving her unmatched value in terms of buffs, burst windows, and team-wide damage amp. All in all though, Yuzuha's Mindscapes as a whole are pretty valuable regardless of which one that you pinpoint. Now let's take a closer look at how Yuzuha performs in actual team setups, particularly in double Anomaly and Miyabi based lineups. For transparency's sake, I do have a full video dedicated to every team that I ran, and as a result, this video will include more of a summary of my findings, and any additional questions can be found and answered in my mentioned team guide. With this, however, let's break down my findings, starting with the double Anomaly teams. This category of team was the first and obvious setup to test, and the results were extremely promising. The lineup of Yuzuha, Vivian, Yanagi proved to be the most effective overall, and this was not only because it delivered the highest deadly assault score among all Anomaly comps, but also because it ranked 3rd overall across all teams, even when including non-Anomaly setups or even Miyabi. While its clear time was about 25% slower than the fastest team, the score more than made up for this, and admittedly, it's Miyabi. What can you do? On the other hand, the team of Yuzuha, Jane, and Vivian proved to be the fastest team that I cleared with for content like Shield defense at around 25 to 30% faster than any other Anomaly lineup. What made this team so strong though wasn't just speed, but also how well-rounded and comfortable it felt to play. Another notable test was the Yuzuha, Vivian, and Piper variant, which clocked in at about 36% slower than the Jane setup previously mentioned, but this still resulted in a respectable score, making it a viable free-to-play friendly choice. For free-to-plays, this is extremely good news, as characters like Piper or Grace are now decent alternatives to slot into Anomaly lineups, especially if you have Vivian or Yuzuha. Moving on to Miyabi-based teams, there really weren't any surprises, though I get it, you're probably tired of hearing about Miyabi and Astra in every video. That said, Miyabi still held the crown as the strongest DPS in the game, and at first I was skeptical about how much she'd actually benefit from Yuzuha's kit, since, well, her damage leans more on freeze mechanics and that massive 4000% multiplier as opposed to pure anomaly scaling, but to my surprise, the synergy from her disorder buffs, the faster anomaly buildup, and Yuzuha's raw attack buffs ended up giving Miyabi a noticeable boost in performance. To add to this, many of Miyabi's best teammates gained amazing value when used in combination with Yuzuha, and as a result, the combination of any Miyabi and Yuzuha team resulted in ridiculous results compared to her competition. The top performing Miyabi team though, without question, was Miyabi, Vivian, and Yuzuha. What set this team apart though wasn't just Miyabi herself, but rather how all 3 agents consistently applied anomalies and maximized disorder damage together. This composition outperformed every other Miyabi setup by about 8 to 10%, and even secured the highest deadly assault score overall. For comparison, it edged out other strong contenders like Miyabi, Yanagi, Yuzuha, and even Miyabi, Bernice, Yuzuha. That said, as I've noted in my updated Miyabi guide, Mono Ice with Yuzuha is still incredibly strong. The classic Miyabi, Lycan, Sokaku trio remained near the top of the charts in terms of raw DPS for deadly assault. However, with just a few changes to the deadly assault buffs, it's very possible that a variation of Mono Ice that has Yuzuha could end up taking the lead as the best team in ZenlessZoneZero. We'll just have to wait and see how future buffs and boss mechanics shake things up. Now, I also experimented with double support Yuzuha setups such as Miyabi, Yuzuha, and Astra, alongside other teams like Yanagi, Yuzuha, Astra, which were surprisingly stable and fairly strong despite lacking a second dedicated anomaly agent. These teams averaged about 10% lower performance compared to the Vivian lineup, but they were still functional and flexible, regardless if it was at the cost of running multiple limiteds. Finally, one of the most interesting results came from testing Yuzuha with attack agents. To my surprise, these actually weren't the worst performances that I'd ever seen, and with certain agents like Hugo, Soldier Zero, Ambi, and Evelyn, the results were even respectable. Now, of course, the attack increase that Yuzuha provides is likely the reason for this, but still, despite there being so many conversations about Yuzuha being exclusively for anomaly agents, it was nice to see that she could still buff general DPS even if they had no real focus on anomaly. All in all, Yuzuha is not just a specific niche support, she's a great addition to any anomaly team. This includes both the double anomaly lineups and even for when she tries to elevate the top performance of Miyabi based teams, and again, even as a a general support, she offers pretty substantial buffs. The attack increase and the anomaly buildup does affect fights significantly, regardless if the team is anomaly based or crit based. So yes, she actually is just that good. But now that we've talked about Yuzuha's strengths, let's now talk about how she compares to Astra, especially when it comes to anomaly focused teams. In direct comparisons, Yuzuha outperformed Astra by about 10% on average, with some setups pushing that advantage as high as 20% depending on team composition and build quality. This made her the stronger pick in anomaly heavy teams, both in terms of raw performance and in how much flexibility she offered in team options. However, outside of anomaly centric lineups, specifically when paired with attack or rupture agents, Astra still held the advantage, with Astra's buffs being more broad and flexible for crit based characters, and her ability to buff characters across multiple playstyles either with raw numbers or with her quick assist mechanic that makes her the go-to choice for teams not built around anomaly. Despite all this, however, Yuzuha's value in specialized anomaly teams alone goes far beyond stat boosts. One of her most unique advantages is how she enables certain agents to shift their builds entirely, and that means that characters like Vivian, for example, can swap their 6th slot from anomaly mastery to attack percent thanks to the amount of free anomaly mastery that Yuzuha provides through her kit. In theory and technically in practice, this would open the door for stronger hybrid builds and higher ceilings, especially when tested and experimented with from fight to fight. In Miyabi's unique case, I actually found Astra to perform worse than Yuzuha though in nearly every scenario when comparing Miyabi clears. That said, it's important to mention that the testing environments I had access to were slightly more favorable to anomaly focused teams. However, this trend is likely to continue for the next few months, especially with Alice and Miyabi featured back to back on limited banners. But as always guys, it's reasonable to expect that upcoming content will lean more towards favoring their mechanics, which means that Yuzuha will be even stronger compared to Astra, at least in the immediate future. Now let's answer the most important question of all: is Yuzuha worth pulling for? To do so, let's start with the pros and cons for her. For pros, based on her release and early performance data, Yuzuha is easily one of the strongest anomaly focused supports we've ever seen. In addition to this, her kit is simple, effective, and extremely consistent. To add to this, she provides incredible value to physical and anomaly teams alike, especially when played around her sweet scare mechanic and quick assists. But unlike other stat requiring units, Yuzuha's stat breakpoints are surprisingly manageable. Hitting 3000 attack is pretty easy and straightforward, and with the proper setup, reaching the 200 anomaly mastery needed is not super RNG outside of getting the W engine, but otherwise it's very straightforward as well. Beyond gameplay though, another pro for her is that her visual design is easily one of the best in the game, and she's already received a summer outfit, making her one of the few characters with an alternate cosmetic already this early into the game's lifespan. Now that said, her strengths do also come with some trade-offs. Despite how great her animations and model are, Yuzuha honestly spends very little time on field. So if you're actually someone who prefers controlling Yuzuha more often, this might feel a little bit like a letdown, since her playstyle definitely revolves around tagging in briefly, then rotating out. To add to this, she also wasn't a universal buffer like Astra. While Yuzuha excels in anomaly-based lineups, her support for standard attack or rupture agents is more limited. So if you're looking for a general purpose support, Astra still holds the crown in terms of flexibility. Lastly, Yuzuha's biggest quote-unquote issue is unironically sometimes just how well her anomaly mastery scales, and this is so much of a problem that it can actually cause her to overload anomaly cooldowns, making her feel a bit clunky in some high-speed rotations, but obviously this is often mitigated by the fact that you're killing enemies so quickly. With all this guys, if you're building around anomaly focused compositions or plan to run physical DPS units like Jane, Piper, or Alice, Yuzuha is an exceptional pickup. Her value will also likely increase with each new anomaly agent introduced, and her build path, while stat dependent, isn't really overly restrictive or complicated once you understand it. Personally though, I'll be pulling for her not just for her kit, but also because it's rare to get a support that looks as good while also playing super easily this early on. But as always, pull for who you like, and just know that if you're focused on anomaly gameplay, Yuzuha is one of the strongest investments you can make in this patch to make both new and old anomaly characters so much better. Thanks again for watching though everyone. I'll see you guys on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.